I was kind of in that place where I started to go down that rabbit hole of, hang on here, you know, medicine and the NHS and doctors aren't necessarily really able to help guide me with what's going on. I've tried all sorts of weird diets. That's not solved anything. And it was kind of random in the few years after that, as I was really poorly researching, like most people in these situations, I stumbled across mold. I randomly did at the time it was Great Plains Lab, mycotoxin test. And it came back with high levels of mycophenolic acid, MPA, and oxytocin A. And then there's some high levels of citrulline as well. And it kind of like made me question what was going on, why that might be an issue. So anyway, I figured, and I didn't have a functional practitioner to work with or anyone else at the time. I just kind of researched on the fly. Okay, fine, that kind of means mold, I guess. I mean, at the time,
Episode 39 with Sam Bowles from Pure Maintenance UK. Really excited to put this video out. It took me a little while to get Sam on. I know he's been incredibly busy. I've posted quite a lot of content over the last year in reference to, health issues around living in a mouldy environment and mycotoxins, etc. In this interview, we discussed why mold grows in your home, how to spot it, certain things that you can use to eliminate it, and also their services as well. I actually used Pure Maintenance about a year ago. We had issues ourselves. It wasn't a huge problem, but even a little bit of mold exposure can cause significant health declines for certain people. And I knew at the time I was one of them. It took me a long time to get to the bottom of exactly what was causing the problems, but I do maintain that mold was a big factor. So we utilised their services. I thought they were very, very good, very professional, come in and out within a day, in terms of the time it took for them to start the work and complete the work. The results were brilliant. We've not had anything come back since, and it was a year ago, as I said, or it was around about a year ago. And our health has improved no end as well. So really, really good service. What I found as well, and you'll see this in this interview whilst I'm speaking with Sam, nearly everyone I spoke to within the business had a very, very good understanding of what they were talking about, not just from a maintenance perspective, but also the effects physiologically that these mycotoxins that are produced from mold spores can actually have on the body. So I was really impressed with their knowledge base. At the time, I was really, really digging into this topic, and I thought my knowledge was quite good. But I actually learned quite a lot from these guys as well. So not just a product or service that they're selling, but also their knowledge I thought was great. So was really impressed with the service, and really impressed with the knowledge from all of the guys, including Sam. As always, please can you like and share the podcast? It really, really does help with the algorithm. I've noticed that we're getting a lot more views on the actual podcast platforms as opposed to YouTube, but I do want to push it on YouTube as well. So please like and share if it's valuable. I've got a link in the description as well, which takes you to their website and also a product offering as well. So if you feel that you have an issue with mold and you want to consult with Pure Maintenance UK, please follow the link. And I wish you the very best with that as well. In your story,
Sure.
I've heard a little bit about yourself and what got you into obviously creating Pure Maintenance UK. I believe sort of similar to what introduced myself into researching mold, because it's not really a glamorous topic, was health problems. Do you mind just going into a little bit of detail as to sort of where your journey began and what kind of led you to where you are now?
Yeah, well, like you, Jay, I was someone that was, concerned about my health. I was diagnosed in 2013 with ulcerative colitis and had no idea what that meant at the time. I was young, I was studying, and I just got really, really poorly out of nowhere. And I was told by doctors that it was down to environment, that they couldn't tell me specifically what was going on, but I understood what an autoimmune condition was. looked into it, didn't really get any resolution. They tried on lots of different meds and biologics. It wasn't just the issues with my gut, it was also the chronic fatigue I suffered. It was also loads of other symptoms that I didn't realize or know about at the time, but post experiencing it, I now see as like more chemical sensitivities and histamine response. But I guess going back then with my ill health, um, I was kind of in that place where I started to go down that rabbit hole of, hang on here, you know, medicine and the NHS and doctors aren't necessarily really able to help guide me with what's going on. I've tried all sorts of weird diets. That's not solved anything. And it was kind of random in the few years after that, as I was really poorly researching, like most people in these situations, I stumbled across mold. I randomly did at the time it was Great Plains Lab, mycotoxin test. And it came back with high levels of mycophenolic acid, MPA, and oxytocin A. And then there's some high levels of citrulline as well. And it kind of like made me question what was going on, why that might be an issue. So anyway, I figured, and I didn't have a functional practitioner to work with or anyone else at the time. I just kind of researched on the fly. Okay, fine, that kind of means mold, I guess. I mean, at the time, I actually thought it was a microtoxin. So I just thought, I've got these microtoxins in my body. I've got to try and sort this mold issue. Now, I was living in pretty nasty conditions in Coventry while I was studying at uni. And so my wife and I decided that we would move and get rid of all of our kind of really contaminated stuff, but obviously didn't do it properly because didn't have a clue. And once we'd done that, I then randomly went on, I say random, did a bit of research, didn't really know what I was doing, did a bit of a made protocol with bentonite clay, activated charcoal, went on an anti-inflammatory diet. And after a few months of doing that, felt much, much better. I was then able to go back to doctors, say, look, I'm feeling great, I'm in remission. And it was that in conjunction, my health issues and my mold journey in conjunction that led to like researching exactly what mold was, what it does, why it's an issue and why it's a concern. It was that kind of passion, I guess, like many who discover they've got mold issues, that caused me to want to investigate and research. So what first started as a desire to, hopefully this is answering the question. What started at first as like, okay, I've been able to find and stumble across something crazy. Maybe it's linked, maybe it's not. Led to kind of investigating mold, what it does. One of my good friends over in the States and I had similar health experiences, kind of, I guess he's like a soulmate, also happens now being business partner, co-founder, Josh. And we'd gone through similar issues. And so I kind of said, look, mate, it could be mold for you. We discussed it. He then, on a bit of random serendipitous coincidence, he stumbled across a company over where he lives, over in the States, Pure Maintenance, who had invented this dry fog technology, which was being used by functional practitioners and also at the time being recommended by Dr. Pompa to help people with resolution in their home. And it was non-invasive. You don't have to knock down buildings. It was kind of a counter to the protocol like leave naked, right? We can try to restore and remediate. So Josh and I on a punt wanted to try and just, help others, help family. We thought, why not? We'll buy this license. At first, we thought about getting it in California, and maybe I'd go out there and have some fun in the sunshine, get some vitamin D. And then COVID happened, and we kind of went, you know what? Let's buckle down here and try and help people in the UK. So he moved over. We had the technology, and it really snowballed. What was supposed to be a side project along other businesses to kind of help friends, family, kind of then snowballed into what is today Pure Maintenance UK using the dry fog technology. So there's a long list of things I could explain to you and express to you, and there's a lot of things I understand now that go into that story that have kind of confirmed my mind, but also bias of what we've gone through with mold. So I'm not saying to you that mold is the only issue. Clearly, there were other issues that exacerbated my health. I was, genetically prone to bowel issues. My dad recently died of bowel cancer. I don't think it takes a genius to work out that there are issues with that. But that was my genetic weakness. I dealt with a lot of stress at the time. That was my environment. And then all you need is some toxins, some environmental toxins, putting pressure on your lymphatic system. you're left with, you know, some issues. Anyway, I'm not a doctor, so I don't want to be fact checked on that by you, Jay, because I could be completely wrong. That's all anecdotal from my experience, but it seems to have worked, and that journey, from my perspective, seemed to shape and help a lot of people in the way. I've talked a lot. You're supposed to ask me more questions to guide me. Sorry.
Well, I was going to say, I think it's key to make the comment that you did. It probably isn't just mold.
Yeah.
I think for me personally, mold just kind of made everything worse.
Yeah.
So I often say, you know, if I speak to anyone that has any kind of weird symptom, not just like a normal symptom of, you know, a normal disease, but any kind of weird things that slip, you know, between the cracks,
Yeah.
have a look for mold.
Yeah.
But again, I don't think you can just get a service like yours and that fixes everything. I think you have to look at detox, you have to look at the diet. These are all things that I did myself. I've spoke quite a lot about issues that I had a few years ago. Mine actually started originally with a vaccine, and then mold made things so much worse. And I think you mentioned chemical sensitivity.
Yeah.
I personally had chemical sensitivity. I had EMF sensitivity. I had like blue light sensitivity. So if I was in, say, a shop like Primark, well, back then it was a nightmare for me.
Yeah.
I'm in there, my eyes are going weird. I can't focus my vision. I was getting vertigo. I was getting loads of different issues. And I actually sort of come to the realization that I think what was happening is I had an overstimulated central nervous system.
Yeah.
And that can be caused by, you know, different toxins, not just mycotoxins from mold. So these things, I always sort of think you need to go down a few rabbit holes. You can't just put all your money on one thing. But what I did notice, so I was fixing a lot of my issues anyway, fixed up the mold, but we did a test with you guys and we had relatively high levels, aspergillus being the main one. Wasn't huge. It wasn't like blow your house up, move away levels, but it was like, you know, I'm glad you called. Let's get this fixed. We did a test after, and it you know, the air in the house was better than outside, which is positive. But I noticed when we did this, my sleep was unbelievable for like probably a couple of months after. The deepest dreams, the longest, deepest sleep. I'd wake up, I'd actually feel even more knackered, you know, than when I went to bed. So I don't know if I was just catching up on lost sleep, where maybe again central nervous system slightly overstimulated, a bit of fight or flight maybe. So I found that sleep was incredible, and near enough all of those niggly problems have literally gone now. Yeah. So I can vouch for you guys from a personal perspective. I wanted to ask, and of course we got to be careful. Like you said, you're not a doctor, and you don't want to be putting out, you know, false information at all. But obviously, you can speak of your personal experiences. Yeah. What kind of things do you see in like a typical client? What kind of conversations are quite regular? And then also, I wanted to ask as well, once your service has been once you've given your service, what kind of things do you see in the aftermath? Like I said, better sleep, you know, do you kind of see anything that you can kind of recognize, do you know what, that probably tells me it is actually working quite well?
Really good question. I get this all the time, and to be honest with you, I'd love to answer this question because I say the same things to every single customer. Genuinely, it's the same situations, it's the same worries, the same stresses, the same likely outcomes, the same pitfalls. And I'm not the one directly dealing with all customers now, so I'm coaching a lot of our support team and to try and consult, to give best advice to help people get the best outcomes possible. What we oftentimes see, and it's really hard for me to talk about symptoms because, as you and I just discussed there, you know, mold is one toxin in the environment. There are many others. Chemicals are going to be one of them. You mentioned EMF. You know, there's all sorts of toxins that can exist. Bacteria creates endotoxins, for example. You know, a virus can cause impact to your central nervous system. A lot of these things can trigger things. I would say that a lot of people come with what I would say is an overactive immune system. So things that previously didn't impact are now a problem, whether that's food intolerances, whether that's, you know, histamine response, or whether there's some respiratory issues or allergenic symptoms, or, you know, fatigue. Generally speaking, it's an overactive immune system. It's people that aren't able to cope with normal life like they were previously. And I'm not the doctor, but it's very clear to see that it's not just mold at that stage. And mold might be one of the contributing factors. It might be the very first thing that started this issue. It might be the very last thing that came on board. It's just one of the many. So it's really hard to pinpoint symptoms specifically just related to mold, because it all just kind of get masked in with everything else. So people that are just poorly, people that are neurologically struggling, brain fog, chronic fatigue, classic, difficulty sleeping, responses in general to difficult problems and the stress it creates. It's really hard. I would say it's very, very common for people to be at an absolute loss and not know where to turn. So when they do come to us and they say, hey, I've got these issues, hey, I'm worried about mold, we have to be very careful, because it's just one part of the problem. And most people only have a certain amount of budget, and they've got to work out the big picture of everything. So how do you help someone understand at the very beginning, this is a big problem that's not just being impacted upon you by mold, but also your stress, your emotions, your genetic issues, your diet, everything, right? We've got to help you realize that mold is one part of it. And yes, for some, it's a much bigger piece of it. So then it comes down to, okay, well, look, if you have got a mold issue, let's test, let's look at the severity of it. Let's work out how we can help you. Once we do work out a protocol for helping, so what that generally looks like is testing, surveying, preparation for treatment, which might include ripping out contaminated materials, drying, making sure that the mold is removed, but also then sterilize the treatment process itself, destroying and rendering inert all species of mold, not just on surface, but also where there is mold hidden. We've got to deal with possessions. We've also got to deal with mold in the airspace. So comprehensive solution to the mold in general. Then there's air purification, ventilation, continual management of not just moisture, but also any residual impact from mold. So that might include air purification to deal with mycotoxins. So we're looking at a comprehensive view of how you do that. If everyone knew what that would cost and the time and the stress associated, they might never go on that journey in the first place. Because remember, stress is one of the biggest contributors to the impact on our bodies. And so it's really hard. Oftentimes, when it's not as severe, it's much easier to deal with. We might see a much quicker improvement in symptoms if it is just mold related, or if it's more simple. I would say one of the biggest correlations I see anecdotally on chances of feeling better after dealing with mold is your ability to cope with the stresses that the environment is creating to you. So this is a really classic one. We'll see mums really worried about children. Partners aren't really taking it seriously because they're not impacted. Remember, only a certain proportion of the population have genetic propensity towards high histamine response. So some people may have no response. Some people may have neurological issues. It works and acts differently. So we'll get a mum whose husband doesn't believe what's going on, saying this is nonsense. That's causing more stress. And I say to them, look, the stress of what's going on in your relationship, the arguments that you're going through, what the children are subjected to with you two threatening to leave each other because he doesn't believe about the mold, is a massive stressor, just like the mold. So, of course, it's a really difficult balance. Money and the costs to sort these things often. I feel like I'm being really negative on chances, right? I like to be very direct and upfront and help people be aware of the big picture. We are one small part of dealing with people's health. Most people have finite budget. We want to try and do the best we can, and that also includes being honest about what can be done, what can be achieved. Remediation, or an attempt to remediate mold in a home, is an attempt. It's not guaranteed. There are loads of moving parts. We as a company are limited. Properties are different. Mold can be dormant for hundreds of years, and it can be destroyed very quickly in other cases. It's a difficult animal, and it needs animal. I shouldn't call it an animal. It's not an animal. I use the phrase animal as like big picture of it. It's a beast that needs a lot of consideration. Sorry, that's probably a very long-winded way of explaining to you some parts of what you asked, but
no, that's perfect. I can actually vouch for you guys.
Paste relevant parts.
Yeah, no, you guys, because I'm a bit of a nightmare. I look into things a lot, and I was on the phone to some of your guys quite often, going really in depth and really testing their knowledge, and also trying to learn as well. and I found I think there was 2 guys, forgot the names now, it was a while ago, but they were great in terms of the information they gave me. And I tested them on the health side of things because it's something I looked a lot into before I made a decision on what to do. And typical type man, I'm thinking, is it really this? And I've gone down the rabbit holes and realized, Jesus, it's actually worth the investment. But after having the conversations with both of them, I was pretty convinced that they knew what they were talking about, or at the very least they saw the bigger picture. So again, I've asked them, can you give me any examples of the sort of similar question as to what I just asked you? And I thought the information they gave me was pretty compelling. The sort of that was quite a loaded question. The last part of the question was, when you've had success, do you see any, of course, symptoms maybe dying down, things changing, if people have balance problems, headaches, things like that, maybe they go away or whatnot? Like I said, the sleep factor, is there kind of any common things that you see quite regularly that you could mention?
Again, it's just like with the symptoms of what people are experiencing, whatever is impacting them the most is the thing that they're going to look to try and get a resolution for, and that's not always guaranteed. Across the board, will people notice a difference after treatment? Yes. So in the vast majority of cases, I would say it's in the high 90s, we succeed first time with treatment, and people notice the air feels lighter, they sleep better, they can breathe easier, the allergenic symptoms reduce. I guess, to answer that question, I'll always be a bit considered here. I remember what it felt like to be really poorly. And I remember when I was really poorly, I was just about to have my bowel out, and I kind of given up. I was really depressed, anxious, obviously. It just became the norm. And over time, I got better. And it was only when I looked back and was like, oh my goodness, I'm so much better, I realized how bad I was, but also like that actually being better was something I never really envisaged. But because it was gradual, it was only in hindsight looking back that I realized the difference. I think because the process for resolution in the home and mold being eradicated is instant, but then the impact that it's had on the body is gradually as the body detoxes. What most people find is that they feel that they notice a difference in air quality straight away, but that the health benefits are more gradual. And then it's 6 months down the line, a year down the line, when cells have regenerated in the body, they look back and go, oh wow, there's correlation there with where I felt better. So our best reviews often aren't immediate, because it will be those a year later that have looked back and said, actually, this company are incredible. They said that they'd do what they were going to do. In hindsight, it's made a huge difference. So yes, to be more specific, it's hard. I think you've covered the main ones. I think one of the biggest ones is fatigue, brain fog, sleep, energy levels. Believing their environment is now safe plays a huge part. For a lot of people, just the belief that they're in an awful environment actually increases the issue. I'm not talking about just placebo and our treatment being a placebo effect, but there is a positive reinforcement of their belief that their environment has now changed.
Yeah, that was big for me. Just knowing, when I go to sleep at night, knowing I'm in there.
That's why we use all the air testing. So it's not really industry standard just to use air testing to show and demonstrate successful treatment. But we guarantee that if you go with us with our protocols and we investigate the source, we can resolve that and remediate. We'll guarantee that we can help you resolve the levels in your home, not just to industry standards, which are very minimal, but also to what's, someone just walked in. So also what's safe or even tolerable. Now, safe as a word is very, very ambiguous because it differs for different people. There is no industry standard. There is no legislative guidelines. So we're always looking at what you're saying. So if you say to me, hey, I'm still concerned. Hey, let's go test. Let's look at this. Hey, I've still got issues. My mycotoxin test is still showing high levels of mycotoxins. Can you help? Are we certain this is resolved? Well, on the testing, it's shown that mold is resolved, but let's look further into this. Are there hidden issues? Are there still concerns with dust and mycotoxins present? Are there issues with possessions that maybe we haven't considered? All that goes into it. Sorry, not the question you asked, but
that's all right. So I know you test just before, then you do the procedure, and then you test straight after. Do you find that the second test can sometimes be not Like, can it be less accurate than, say, if you tested again in a week, 2 weeks, 3 months, or?
So, good question. Testing is always very limited. So all types of testing, whether it's spore trap testing, either non-viable or viable, DNA, qPCR testing, whether it's petri dish testing, which we don't offer because it's very unreliable, or the problem with testing in the context you're talking about is there can be false positives and false negatives with testing. We can go into property with physical mold and the air test doesn't really show anything. Why? Well, if mold is not in a place where it's sporing, then it could just be dormant. It might not show up. We could find that there is no physical mold, but unbelievable amounts of mold in the airspace. Why? Because it might have been recently tried, mold's under stress, spores load really aggressively. We do as much testing as we can, but budgets will allow to paint a picture of what might exist. And then post-treatment, we know that with our treatment, because we're actually putting mold under stress in your property, if we aggravate the mold, put it under stress, and we haven't successfully treated, the immediate air test that we take after treatment will show elevated spores. It will send it into overdrive. So we're able to find out whether we're successful in our treatment or not, simply based on the air test afterwards. The air test afterwards really isn't an indication that there is no mold present in your home. That would be another test that we would do at a later point, just to confirm that all issues are resolved. The after treatment air test is more to make sure that we've done our job properly on the day. So yes, there is always a reason to believe that testing on the day is relevant, so we can check our treatment has been successful or not. But then also later on down the stage, if you wanted to continue to check air quality, we'd recommend it. We don't necessarily advise it, because if we have seen a successful treatment, based on the confidence we have in our technology and the desire to save you money, we don't think that there is much need, because we're pretty confident we've seen all the data after successful treatment. As long as we've mitigated the risks, we're pretty confident there's going to be no concern. So again, long-winded way of explaining it to you. Maybe that's a bit more complicated, but that's our internal process. If we did find air testing at a later point that showed issues still, we'd know that if the original treatment showed a successful, therefore not showing elevated spores, we're dealing with a hidden issue that we then need to investigate further. So that can be something that impacts some customers, in which case we would communicate that, look, this is what we need to do. That's why we have to listen to what you're saying as well as the testing.
Perfect. When I was looking into this mold situation, you got like your typical man who's like, just wipe it and get over it. That's one side of the spectrum. And then you've got the other side, which is, I think maybe there's a bit of good advice there, but it felt to me like fear mongering as well. And that's like, rip the walls out, burn the house down. It's almost like, wow, the stress of that for me was unbelievable. I was looking at my home, which I've got a mortgage on. When we moved in, it was the dream, and now I'm looking at it like, this is a burden now. And it was a really stressful, horrible time and situation. But what I liked about you guys is it's that kind of middle ground. It's like, okay, look, if there are parts of the house that we believe need to be fully remediated, we need to rip out this wall, like, we're going to advise you on that. However, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the technology that you use, it can actually get to those difficult to reach places. Can it penetrate the drywall as well, if I remember rightly?
So need to probably update you, but also just give you an overview of everything in general in our position. As a company, we are much more able to help and resolve pretty much all issues relating to mold now. Previously, we were limited on skill and also what we specialized in and what we were best at. At the time, I think for you, we didn't have certain access, so we'd have to refer, for example, to third parties for drying or to more invasive investigations. So we relied heavily on our dry fog technology. And yes, the dry fog technology can get to hidden and inaccessible areas, but there are going to be limits to that. But there's also limits to what the fog can achieve. Moisture, for example, present in a building will block the fog's ability to penetrate the hyphae. So to answer your question, yes, we are a very balanced approach. We can go to the extreme and the most health conscious out there, and we'll try and deal with that as best we can and create a vigorous protocol. Clearly, the costs of that are, from my perspective, personally outrageous, And I'd never want to push someone down that journey, especially to start someone on that journey when it can be a simple fix, especially considering the costs and stress involved. Remember, stress is a huge part of this, which adds to the issues. If we can deal with this quickly and efficiently, we'll always lean heavily on our dry fog technology. If we cannot, or if we fail with the dry fog technology, that's when it becomes a problem that we're going to have to look at that. I guess it's a bit like, I use this analogy sometimes, taking my car to my local garage and I'm going to say, hey, look, try and patch this up to make this, car work. I need to get from A to B. I'm relying on this, but also, give me some advice on it. And he looks at it and goes, okay, look, I can try and get this past its MOT, but maybe just don't look under the hood because there's going to be some severe problems there. But if you do want to, solve it properly once and for all, I can do that. But if you look under the hood, you're going to see some serious issues. We're going to have to alert you, if you want it here, of all of those issues, which is great. But if that's going to add stress and the costs are going to be, unable for you to actually do it, then let's tell you that up front and you can make a decision. For example, on one extreme, you've got some protocols which say to leave naked. There's nothing you can do. Get out, burn your clothes. Is that feasible? Yes, I've had customers where, honestly, looking at what it would take for them to remediate their home and also those risks of their health, I would never say to them to attempt remediation because the road ahead is so severe and so difficult and costly. Okay, do they leave naked? No, maybe it's a trip to Bali or I don't know, whatever. But then I've had others on the other end of the spectrum that have really succeeded from a health perspective with a very quick, intervention for dry fog technology. And then there's those in between. We're always trying to pivot to what you need, but that might make it feel like the advice on how to deal with mold changes. It doesn't. It's just as you look deeper in what you need, how sensitive your body is to mold, more might be required. If we led with our protocol for every single person that called us, listen, we're also dealing with the landlord that wants to get this cleaned as quickly as possible. They're not interested in health ramifications whatsoever. And we're trying to educate them. So, well, actually, this is what you need to do here. This is your kind of obligation morally. They're not going to go the full extent, are they? So it's that piece of how do we cater to all, not just health, but also to mold in general. So, yeah.
When you guys come to see my house, the prognosis was a lot better than I was worried about. Mm-hmm. So that made me feel good. And for anyone who's listening that's thinking of using you guys, like, I wasn't naive, so I don't think my pants could have been pulled down, so to speak. But I definitely think that there could have been an oversale of a service because we was concerned. And we found the guy that come around was really informative, and he's like, no, honestly, this is where we're at. This is what I recommend. And it was the kind of most basic package. Yeah. And like I say, it worked really well, and there was a lot of trust there. And we've gone away feeling really positive. So I can vouch for that on a personal scale. But when you look into these things, you can really become incredibly fearful, and you do see things that are said, burn your clothes. I have quite an expensive wardrobe. I spend quite a lot of money on clothes. I wear a lot of designer clothes. I'm not going to burn my clothes.
Unless it's an Arsenal shirt. Yeah.
What's that?
Unless it's an Arsenal shirt.
Oh, I'm an Arsenal fan as well. Oh,
I'm a Spurs fan. We'll end it here.
That's it. It's over. Okay. No, so like I say, I can vouch from a personal perspective. In terms of, like, if you don't mind, so things that people can do off their own accord. So, of course, if there is a real, serious situation and you need professional help, call you guys. Definitely what I'd recommend. But what we did before is we got ourselves a dehumidifier. We got ourselves an air purifier as well, which we noticed did, because most people don't ever use a purifier in their house. So going from not using one to even using a basic couple of £100 one, the difference is quite remarkable. Sure. When we started using the dehumidifier, it was filling up big time, twice a day. I think it's like 4 litres, throwing it down the bath. Was like, oh my God. But then all of a sudden it take like a week to fill up. So we probably had sort of base level of humidity in the house, but once we kind of cleared that up, and when your guy come round, he said, look, I don't sense any dampness at all. you know, there's not really much going on in terms of a repetitive or a permanent problem. Any advice on these types of things, just to kind of start with, and also after your protocol as well?
Yeah, so let me try and answer that question by giving you a bit more detail of what we're really looking at as to, you know, rating the severity of the issue. One, we're always looking at, look, are you health conscious about this? Are you severely health impacted? Vast majority of people are not. So we don't want to cater all of that to, you know, our entire protocol just to the most sensitive, like I was. Most people are looking at, look, what's your cause of damp? Why do you have moisture and ingress of mold? Is it rising damp, penetrating damp, condensation damp? Do you have active leaks? Is there guttering issues? Are there external issues that are contributing? Is it condensation? If it is condensation, why are you creating that much condensation? Is there sufficient ventilation in the property? Are you not able to get rid of that moisture? Are there structural concerns or issues, pointing issues, which are causing cold spots or reasons why moisture is present? For example, your case, you know, you've got dehumidifier pulling moisture out. I'm sure what probably happened prior to the dehumidifier is that you've got a lot of surface moisture that you're pulling, whilst you're also breathing more moisture every single day and also using radiators, whatever, to dry clothes, which is adding to it. So you've got to get rid of the condensation that you're currently using, creating from what you're doing and how you're using the home, and then pull out that that's already been created, the moisture. Once that's there, it's then maintenance. I guess it's a bit like calorie counting if I want to lose weight, you know, which is what I'm trying to sort right now and get fit and strong and sexy. So if I want to get in a position where I'm getting in deficit for calories, I've got to not only reduce my amount that I'm eating, but also then get to a point where I'm maintaining that. So at that stage, I can create more moisture. I can eat more because I can get rid of more. I don't know why I'm giving this analogy, but it's the same thing. If anyone's following, I don't need to go into it. You get the same principle. You've got to get in a deficit with your condensation to then pull it out. Same thing. Maybe you don't include that because that's an awful lot of waffle. But that's a very similar situation. So how do most people deal with condensation? Well, yes, you mentioned dehumidifiers. That's going to pull moisture. You want to be careful because you don't want to dry too quickly, because it puts mold under stress. Stressed mold creates more mold in the airspace, not only a health issue, but also it's hard to get rid of. Then obviously, when you're looking at air purification, yes, air purification is fantastic. If you want to try and get rid of mold, you want to try and go above HEPA 13. Air purifiers are more expensive at that grade because they're not just dealing with mold, they're getting rid of the mycotoxins. But also remember, air purifiers are just dealing with what's in the air. Dehumidifiers are just pulling moisture out of the air. None of that is getting rid of the source of mold. So yes, you can get rid of moisture in the home. Yes, you can fix all the issues. But if you've had mold and it's spored into the home and created issues, you have to sterilize as well. So we're looking at a combination of fixing damaged issues, ripping out issues that are a concern. For most people, that doesn't exist. If it's just condensation, sort out the moisture, we treat, and then you just maintain conditions to make sure moisture doesn't come back. You really want to be in around 40 to 60% humidity, relative humidity in a home. That's when you're in a good place. You're not in the danger zone of mold being created. Don't want to be too low from that, because then you're looking at difficulties with respiratory system. So air's too dry.
Yeah, which I actually had an issue of myself.
Yeah, okay.
Dried the house out. It was like a desert.
Which is great because you don't want mold.
Yeah.
But there is a healthy in between.
Yeah, yeah. We have a like a humidity, I don't know what it is, like a
Hygrometer.
Yeah, a meter. Yeah, so that's pretty handy. In terms of so like the obvious signs of mold.
Yep.
See, you can see it. That's when I was reading up that when you can see, say it's like a 5 pence size of black mold, you're talking like trillions of mold spores. So but when you can see it, that's a big deal, and especially when it's, I don't know if I got the numbers right there, but
yeah, I would say I'd always be a bit cautious, because just the physical presence of mold doesn't necessarily mean that you need to call us, right?
Yeah.
This is all based on what's going on. If you wanted to get rid of small amounts of mold, I've always got to be careful when I advise this, but use PPE, get an FP3 mask. use white vinegar, air out the property, small amounts. What is small? I can't give you that answer because there's no amount of mold that is safe or fine for people. So if you're concerned or worried, maybe not, call us, get advice. We can try and give advice. We're not going to say, do it all yourself if we think it's a concern. If it's just being sensible, right? It's we're going to try and help advise there. Some people can do it themselves. If it's in showers or high condensation areas, it's going to be less of a risk. That doesn't mean it's not a risk. It's just you're more likely to have it. So if it's in sealant, it's probably more cost effective for you to replace your sealant. The times when it's getting more of a concern is when you're starting to see it on surfaces in slightly larger areas where it's had the ability to spore over time, or it's consistently coming back. It's embedded in the materials. You're starting to see it on possessions. Because if you see it on possessions, it means that the spores are coming to the airspace, they're landing on possessions from elsewhere. You're at a stage where it's going to be really saturating the airspace. What do we often see? Yeah, at the stage where you've got physical mold growing on surfaces or possessions in the home, you've got to remember that what you're seeing there is around 5% of what's actually in the home. The vast majority is in your airspace. 95% of it is in your airspace. So, a lot of people that will ask us, to come and test their homes for mold in the UK are unbelievably high. The labs are always shocked at our results when we send them in compared to other countries because it's just so damp here. There's so much moisture, therefore there's so much mold. And our British attitude, and maybe it's stiff off a lip, to mold is not the same as other nations across the world. So the world kind of standards for mold kind of suggest, I say kind of because it all varies, 500 spores per meter cubed is kind of okay. It's not. That depends on the species of mold. That's really the issue. You might see more than that in some species and less that in others, and it's a concern. But we will come into a home, oftentimes a little bit of mold on the surface, millions of spores per meter cubed. Remember, 500 is kind of what they're saying. Yeah. We'll see millions, and someone will be like, "How's that possible?" And we'll say, "Well, it's because it spores really aggressively, And we might also test, and it's totally fine on the surface. There's mold, but it's not sporing in the airspace. That doesn't mean it's not a concern. It just means that the spores have fallen. There's nothing in the air to test. Mold's happy. It's growing. There's moisture. There's food. It's not focusing on sporing. It's focusing on hyphae growth. That's not an exact science. I have to be very careful there to caveat that, because all mold and species, handle themselves differently. Yeah, that's a very generalized statement. So I'm really cautious that some advice can be taken and it can actually make a situation worse.
Yeah.
For example, someone might say, "Oh, he told me to get a dehumidifier," but actually the dehumidifier made the health situation worse because they dried it too quickly, or put in the mold, drying the mold, and a nasty species of mold put it under stress. I also know that means people have this analysis paralysis where they go, "Well, what am I supposed to do? There's nothing I can do. I have to call this company." It's very difficult to weigh and give advice, which is why it takes a bit of a consultative, personalized, tailored approach to your situation. Just like healthcare isn't just one size fits all, here you go, take this. It needs to be listened to, even if that's what they want to claim it is.
Yeah. Okay, just final question on that. What about when you get to a stage of like a musty type of smell?
Okay.
Shut the window, shut the door of a room, a big room. Come in a couple of hours later and it's musty. Is that, could that just be there was mold and it's in the carpets and it's just kind of the smell? Or is that like we got a problem here?
It's really tough because whenever we use the word musty or where we're talking about smells, it's really difficult because what you might smell is something different to me. For example, my wife smells things all the time that I can't smell. And I'm like, well, I've got a rubbish sense of smell. Yeah. Whereas I can sense mycotoxins. So I can smell mold where she won't, so the difficulty here is that people will describe a musty smell, and generally what we're trying to work out is, look, are you smelling damp and moisture and kind of rotten material, which is kind of what I think most people kind of suggest is that smell, or are you smelling the mycotoxins, the fragments, the spores? Because there's different smells and they'll be the same. They're synonymous: damp, mold, mildew. They're all words kind of describe this kind of smell, but there is a difference. A musty smell always needs to be investigated because oftentimes it is an indicator that there could be hidden moisture, rot, and damp somewhere, maybe even that's hidden, especially if you can't find it, and that is a concern. Generally speaking, the treatment will obviously render mold inert and get rid of mold and reduce the mycotoxins, and the smell should go. If a smell exists after treatment, we either know that one, we've either failed in our treatment, which would mean we need to investigate that and look at that, and if that's the reason why, or more often than not, it's not that we failed in the treatment, it's that there is a hidden issue, and that needs to be addressed. So that doesn't happen for the vast majority, but that is a limitation of us going in straight away to fog. If there is a hidden issue, then obviously we need to deal with that. The problem is the quickest, most effective way to find a hidden issue is to find that the fog hasn't been successful, because it proves that there is. It's a bit like, and I say this to people all the time, it's a bit like trying to diagnose IBS. You go to the doctor and say, or maybe I'm just talking about gut because it's my thing. You go to the doctor and say, hey, I've got issues with my gut. They might be thinking in the back of their mind this is IBS, but they're going to go and rule out cancer, IBD, celiac disease, and other food intolerances. Once they get to that stage and say none of those issues are what you're dealing with, it's IBS.
Yeah.
And what does that mean? It's a whole host of other things. Could it be leaky gut, stress, diet, whatever. So for us, it's the same thing. We are trying to rule out those sinister issues, and one of the best ways to do it is to treat. If that doesn't work, that's when we know actually, because one of the risks of this isn't actually the question you asked. I'm on another tangent here. This is what happens.
Keep going, mate. Keep going. It's good.
One of the issues we find is that a lot of people want to find a hidden issue to know exactly what it will cost to fix up front. You can't always find a hidden issue because it's hidden. This is the conundrum. And so if we lead with suggesting that everyone's got a hidden issue and that we've got to find the hidden issue of mold, what happens if we never find an issue? Well, it might be that either we haven't found it or there isn't one to begin with. So therefore, could we have just treated? The other issue with hidden issues is that we have to be invasive to find them, which means ripping out materials, investigating, which also causes an issue with cross-contamination and risk of exposing what previously wasn't exposed. So we'd always want to do that under containment and also with a protocol in place. So I guess the journey is quite difficult. It always needs tailored advice, and you can see the nuances here, and helping someone in that journey understand best case scenario from the beginning just isn't possible. We have to give them like, look, this is what it could be, but we can't know that until we investigate. And so we've got to demonstrate to you that we're a company that you can trust, that is going to try our best to do right by you, but ultimately we're committed to you and helping you, but there are limitations, and as long as we're upfront about that, hopefully you'll bear with us. So